Here is a list of the genealogy of the patriarch Abraham in Genesis 10 in the Bible, often called the Table of Nations. It describes how the descendants of Noah spread across the world after the Great Flood through his 3 sons. When they talk about world, it's not saying the entire world, it's the world that they occupied, that region. It's a giant landmass. You've probably heard of or seen the video of the black Hebrew Israelite at some point in Israel, a tourist spot with the big charts, etc. He's talking about the Pangea. It was just one massive landmass, okay, until the plates shifted, etc., etc. So Africa could have been where Israel is, Israel could have been where Africa is. But there was no country called Africa, because these people in the Bible named their small towns, villages, cities, etc. after their forefathers. These descendants named them after their forefathers, as they did with their language. It wasn't really until the Greeks came across them and says, "Oh, what language are you speaking? It's a strange language." And people says, "Oh," the people there said, "Oh, this is the language of our forefather." "Oh yeah, Aram." "Oh, okay. We will, us Greeks will give you a name." Say, when we go back, when they went back to Athens or wherever in Greece, and they were asked, "Where'd you go?" "Oh, we went to this certain geographical location at some point." "Okay, what did you see?" "Oh, we saw these people there." "Oh yeah, what about them?" "Oh, they spoke this funny language, strange language." And they said that it's a language of their forefather Aram. So we gave them the apt name for that language. They spoke Aramaic. "Oh, okay. Because they're basically the possessors of that particular language." "Okay. We named their geographical location Mesopotamia, because they're famous for, or the thing that's popular there was these 2 great rivers. They may have had this native name. We decided to call it Mesopotamia, the land of 2 great rivers, and so forth. And then they did the same with Syria, Asia, India, Persia, and so forth. They named them by putting an end prefix on the end, IA, which indicates that geographical location was possessed or owned by those particular people, and the language that they spoke, they put the ik in prefix on the end, and says, well, okay, this is the language you speak, be it Syriac, Asiatic, Arabic, etc. Just made it a heck of a lot easier than them trying to remember Assyrian or Syrian or Aramaean names. So the descendants of Noah spread across the world, that known world, the east. Have a look at the Bible. Adam is east of the garden, and he gets ousted, he gets pushed to the east of it, and then the pre-Adamics, they're east of that garden, because Adam and Eve were put in a sacred holy spot in Eden, and they communicated with God, etc., etc. And then Cain kills Abel, and he gets ousted out. They're all going east all the time, east, east, east. Right? He goes east into the land of Nod, and so forth. Because if they went north, probably going to the sea, south, they're probably going to the sea, or west, they'll end up in the sea, perhaps. But it was just one giant landmass until the plates shifted, etc., etc., their seismic activity. And then other invaders came in and started to name their lands, giving them their language names to these other countries that, or these places that they had invaded. So the three sons were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The thing you got to note too is that Ham is usually spelled with a K in front of it, so it looks like Kham, but it's actually silent. It's like the Tav Asherah. We used to call it the Katav Asherah, but then we realised, hey, hang on, it's a silent K, so it's Tav, like you have the Tav Ivri. So in reality he's Ham. And then you had the Egyptians, who are the descendants of this particular son, Ham. And it says in that genealogy list that these people would become the future nation Mithraim, Cush, and Put, and Canaan. These Egyptians. Biblical scholars and historians have traditionally associated their descendants with various ancient peoples and regions. These are traditional identifications, not modern genetic or historical certainties. Descendants of Noah and traditional nations. Oh, by the way, yeah, the K was silent, right? So, US, Hebrew Israelites, etc., those on the Sarnita live TV show, you're not Kemites. If you had a K before it and it's silent, you're Hamites, not Kemites or Kemites or Kemites, because Hamites basically means the descendants or the peoples of Ham, or Shemites, the descendants of Shem, possibly Japhethites would be the descendants of this particular son here. So it's not Kemet, it's probably Hemet. Descendants of Noah and traditional nations. Japheth, peoples of Europe and parts of Asia. And this is a map, right? You're probably familiar with the US Hebrew Israelite or Pan-African that went to Israel, and there's like this tourist spot, a big board there displayed, and he was explaining on YouTube a video about Pangea. So, as they say, there was just one giant landmass that everybody was occupying. None of these big rivers, etc., like that, these seas, until there was major seismic earthquakes action, and the plates rubbed up against each other, pushed up against each other as earthquakes, volcanic eruption, etc., and then the land split, and then these rivers, seas were made, right, as a result. And nobody had names like Africa or Europe or Russia or anything like that. They had their own language names until someone else came in and decided to name it that. Okay? So here's the sons here. Traditionally linked peoples, regions, Sumerians, later associated with Anatolia, possibly early Europe. Magog, often linked with Scythians, regions north of the Black Sea. Madai, Medes in ancient Iran. Javan, Greeks, Ionians, before they were called the Hellenes, Hellens, and then they become the Greeks, because they had a goddess called Helen, something along those lines. Tubal, peoples of Anatolia or Turkey, Meshech, possibly Anatolian or Caucasus tribes. Tiras, often associated with Thracians or Balkans. Sub-descendant examples: Ashkenaz, later linked with people around Germany, Eastern Europe. I don't think they would appreciate being called Ashkenazi because of the Nazis, right? These people, a lot of people say, well, they look very white, very European. Huh? Yeah. It's like the Khazarians. The king of Khazaria at some point had Islam on his border, or Mohammedans on his border, ready to come in and attack. They would have had to convert to Mohammedanism, i.e. Islam, if they had have came in. But they also had the Christian Crusaders on the other, one on the left, one on the right. So whoever came in, this king was like, cared about his people, loved his people. He's like, well, what do I do? What do I do? You know, either if one of them comes in there and wins and takes over, we're either going to be Christian or we're going to be Mohammedan. So when they came in and they saw that he went neutral because he had these Jews residing in Khazaria, he decided to embrace that religion, take on that religion, because it was neutral. So they converted to Judaism apparently. So when the Mohammedans came in and said, oh, okay, well, you know, it's all good because they believe in God. Christian Crusaders come in, oh yeah, that's all good because they believe in God, etc. So we'll leave them alone. That sort of thing. Son of Ham, traditionally linked peoples regions: Kush, Ethiopia, Nubia, Sudan region. A lot of experts point to that Sudan region rather than Ethiopia. Mizraim, or Mithraim, Egypt. They became the Egyptians. Put, Libya, North Africa. Canaan, Levant, Israel, Palestine, Lebanon. Later on, the Egyptians, we believe, invaded it. They ruled it all. They had fortifications and towers to people to keep an eye on invaders. So they're getting invaded by the Hittites a lot and other seafarers coming up a certain valley. But lucky there was high cliffs, etc., desert high cliffs and so forth. So the Egyptians would be aware of it and send their troops out there and fight them off before they got to Egypt and took it over. Descendants of Canaan include Sidon, Phoenicians, Heth, Hittites, Jebusites, Jerusalem region, Amorites, Hivites. A famous figure in this line, Nimrod, described as a mighty ruler connected with early cities like Babylon. Remember the Tower of Babel? It was built there. He created this city, this great city called Babylon. Babylonia. They're called Babylonia by the Greeks, possibly. A mighty hunter against the Lord, according to the book of Genesis. Shem, Middle East, Semitic people. So that's the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites, the true Israelites, the Israelis, etc. Son of Shem, traditionally linked people regions: Elam, ancient Elam, southwest Iran. Ashur, that's how it was originally spelled. A-S-S-H-U-R or A-S-H-U-R. The Greeks didn't have a sh sound in their language, so they spelled it as A-S-S-U-R. And it's not Jacob's son or grandson or descendant, Ashur. That's spelled completely different, A-S-H-E-R. This is also the name of God. Ahiyah, Ashur, Hiyah. Okay, that's related to the Assyria, northern Iraq. Faxad, ancestor of Hebrews. He's the father of Eber. Okay, and they were known as the Hebrews, but they didn't speak that language. They probably spoke Akkadian at that point, because the Hebrew language wasn't developed until Isaac's era, which wasn't that long anyway. Then Lud, often linked to Lydia or Turkey. Aram, Arameans, Syria. So here's the end prefix given to them by the Greeks. So it becomes Syria. Originally it was called Aram, etc. Important descendants: Eber, root word of the word Hebrew. Peoples, who was that? Made a passage. They crossed over the rivers, right, to enter into the promised land to Abraham and his descendants by God. So they were called in the original ancient Aramaic Awer, A-W-E-R, meaning those who crossed over, those who made a passage, or those who journeyed. Abraham, ancestor of Israelites, Arabs, etc. In this sense, it may mean not Muslims or Mohammedans, because they were first Mohammedans, right? And so forth, and then they became known as Islam or Muslims. Desert wanderers, desert dwellers, those who raised goats and sheep and lived in tents and wandered the desert regions. Simple traditional world distribution. Line, regions traditionally associated. Japheth, Europe, parts of Central Asia. Kham, Africa, parts of Middle East. Shem, Middle East, Semitic peoples, Jews, Israelites, etc. Important, these identifications come from ancient Jewish and Christian tradition. Medieval historians and early ethnographers trying to link biblical genealogy with known nations. Modern anthropology and genetics do not treat them as literal ancestry maps, but they remain historically important. Here is the linguistic and historical information that many biblical scholars discuss. Eber and the origin of Hebrew. Eber, or Heber in your modern version, a modern Bible might have an H in front of it. Hebrew, Eber, is listed in Genesis as a descendant of Shem and an ancestor of Abraham. Yeah, we're talking with a Jewish person, and they said, oh, they made a comment on our YouTube channel, Ministry of the Real Truth. Oh, yeah, Awer. Okay, we have the same in Hebrew. Maybe he said it was Aver, A-V-E-R, or I-V-E-R, something like that. But yeah, he related to that. Eber, Hebrew, Eber. This is listed in Genesis as a descendant of Shem and an ancestor of Abraham. The term Hebrew, Ivri, there was the old scripts, there was the Tav Asheri, or Ashrit, and then there was the Tav Ivri, the Aramaic and the Hebrew. They were sister languages, except one was older than the other. And they had the same words, it's the same meanings, until somebody like later on, like the Masoretes, added vowels to the consonants where they originally didn't have it. Didn't have vowels. They might have had an A, but that was considered a consonant, as in the end of the word Allah, which has nothing to do with Mohammedanism or Islam. It's a dualistic, triune God, whereas the Allah, or Allah, is monotheistic. So, the term Hebrew, Ivri, is widely believed to come from the same root as Eber. Yeah, because they're sister languages, except one was older than the other. Until the Masoretes came along and added vowels, and it changed not only the structure but also the meaning of the words. So they originally were sister languages, one was just older than the other, and they had words like Euma, meaning immeasurable period, Eon, age, era, or day with capital D. In the Brita, in the Aramaic, English in Genesis in English, it was in relation to the Son of God creating the sky and the earth, or heaven and the earth, and all things on the planet. Vegetation, plants, fruit, vegetables, etc., etc. And then animals, and then Adam and Eve. The pre-Adamics, and then Adam and Eve. So they had the word Euma, Y-U-M-A, which meant that, because a day to God is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years to God is like a day. And there was infinite space. There was no time as we knew it, so he took his time, put it that way. He didn't rush. So it wasn't a literal 6th day with a 7th day of rest. It was an immeasurable period, unfathomable period, an eon, or an era. Day with a capital D, because that was that moment, that immeasurable period where God created, or the Son of God created everything on the earth forward. It could have been triune act, triune Godhead, union, working together, possibility. So these are the meanings here, meaning of the root. You have the Hebrew, which the word is yom. See, these two are sister languages, say the same words, same meanings. But then when somebody added the vowels to the consonants, it changed the structure and it changed the meaning of the words. So they had similar words but different meanings. That's why you have a yuma for the immeasurable period, a fathomable period, era, age, capital day with capital D for God's creation work, and then you have the Hebrew Yom, which is a small d for day, meaning or referring to a day of the week. That's why you have in your modern Bibles, your Jewish translations, etc., that God did all in 6 days and then he had a rest on the 7th. If the Tab Asher, the Aramaic, the Lishana Atika, the sacred scribal language, God spoke to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, which is older, then it wasn't a literal 6-day event. Because remember, with God, a day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. And it was infinite space. There was no time as we know it. So every Hebrew literally can mean one from the other side, or one who crosses over, or who crossed over. This connects, this is what it says in the Brita, the Aramaic Brita, translated into the nearest English equivalent. One who crossed over, meaning Abraham and his descendants. This connects strongly with the biblical story of Abraham, who left Mesopotamia, the end of 2 rivers, and crossed the Euphrates River to enter Canaan. The Awer, Haburu, Apiru connection. Many historians also compare the word Hebrew with a group mentioned in ancient Near Eastern texts, Haburu, Apiru, Habiru. These appear in Egyptian, Akkadian and other Near Eastern records from roughly 1800 to 1200 BC. They were described as migrants, outsiders, semi-nomadic groups, i.e. Arabs, people moving between regions. So if hear these Islamic imams saying, oh, Adam was a Muslim, or Muhammadan, this guy was a Muslim, Jesus was a Muslim, it's all baloney. And Ishmael was the hybrid son, half son of Abraham, who was told to sleep with his wife's concubine or maidservant, who was an Egyptian. Some of these Egyptians saw the amazing things that happened and probably hung out with these people, right? So yeah, he did that, and he had a son, a half-breed called Ishmael, who was possibly half, well, because his mother was Egyptian, so he may have been half Chaldean, because Abraham was born in Ur of Chaldea. His parents had moved there, probably after a Babylonian exile or something like that, and he was born there. So he was born in the city of Chaldea, or Chaldea, Ur of Chaldea. So he probably would have spoken Akkadian or something like that. So it's claimed that this Ishmael is the forefather of the Arabs, the Arabics, right? Arabic peoples, etc., etc. You have to do your research on that to verify that they actually are. Because as they tried to say, that the imams, that Adam was a Muslim or Muhammadan, which is not true. Because it didn't come around until like 6th or 7th century, so it wasn't there before Muhammad, right? Aramaic and later Hebrew forms. In related Semitic languages, you use the Hebrew, Ivri. You have that writing, the Tav Ivri, and you have the Tav Ashri or Ashrit. Aramaic, similar root to that. Modern Hebrew pronunciation Ivri. The idea of those who crossed over fits the narrative of migration from Mesopotamia into the land of Canaan. In simple terms, it's essentially reflecting this traditional interpretation. Iba is Ivri or Hebrew, meaning the people who crossed over from the other side of the river. So they're solely a people. They weren't speaking Hebrew, not until Isaac's era, when it was developed. Connected to the migration of Abraham's family from Mesopotamia into Canaan.